Hey guys, tonight we're walking down a foggy London street, the kind cobbled with quiet secrets and the occasional carriage wheel rut. The gas lamps flicker, the air smells like coal smoke and bread crust, and just as you're about to head home, something ridiculous catches your eye, a pineapple. Not a crate of them, not a fruit cart, just one sitting proudly in a townhouse window perched like it's royalty. And in Georgian England, it kinda was. This wasn't just a fruit. This was the Beyonce of produce, the status symbol to end all status symbols. It practically had its own bodyguard. People didn't eat pineapples, they displayed them. If you saw a pineapple, you didn't ask who bought it, you asked who they were trying to impress. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere across the world, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in London, somewhere around 1765. The pineapple you see might be the only one in the entire neighborhood, maybe even the entire borough. It has its own pedestal, its own carefully polished spotlight. You're not supposed to touch it, obviously. Touching it would be like licking the crown jewels. In fact, it may well be rented, because pineapples in Georgian England weren't just rare, they were mythical. The tropical fruit had already been floating around in European circles since the 1600s, but in 18th century Britain, it reached peak weirdness. A single pineapple could cost as much as a carriage horse, and while some folks did slice into them, many more just used them as decoration, as bait, as proof that they were better than you. There are diary entries from this era, respectable people, deeply literate and morally upstanding, describing the moment they first laid eyes on a pineapple with the same awe you might reserve for a UFO sighting. One clergyman described the fruit as an emblem of nobility and virtue, which is, honestly, a lot of pressure for a prickly fruit that's kinda hard to cut. But this obsession wasn't just about flavor. Most Georgians never even tasted one. If you did, it was usually underripe and disappointing, kinda like chewing perfume. But that didn't matter, because pineapples had an aura. They radiated mystery and status as if they whispered, "Yes, I grew up somewhere warm, somewhere far from your rain-drenched life, and I'm way too expensive to eat, Elle." You start to notice them in art, in architecture, in decorative urns and crests. They show up in coat of arms. You pass a small hotel with a pineapple carved into the gatepost, and it hits you. This thing isn't a fruit anymore. It's a brand. It's the Georgian version of a blue check mark. But what makes it all feel even more surreal is the disconnect between how pineapples were talked about and what they actually were. Sure, they looked regal. That geometric symmetry, that gold meets green armor, that leafy crown. But at the end of the day, it was still a fruit. It rotted, it leaked, it attracted flies. And yet, here you are, watching two footmen carefully carry one into a manor house on a silver tray like it's the Holy Grail. Historians still argue whether the pineapple craze was driven more by genuine admiration for the fruit's exoticism, or by the increasingly competitive rituals of the aristocratic one-upmanship. Probably both, but what's clear is that it wasn't really about taste. It was about visibility. One newspaper from the 1770s published a short story about a dinner guest who accidentally cut into the host's centerpiece pineapple and was never invited back, not because the host missed the pineapple, but because everyone else noticed, and that broke the illusion. You wander past a merchant storefront, and there it is again, a pineapple perched like a beacon, and next to it, a price tag that could fund an entire wedding. There's even an account of one enterprising grocer who, in a moment of inspired capitalism, began renting out a single pineapple to multiple customers in a week. Monday night, it sat in a banker's foyer. Tuesday, it graced a debutante ball. By Sunday, it was back in storage, a little more shriveled, but still dazzling to the next person who needed to prove they had made it. The pineapple was a social chameleon. It slipped between classes, not easily, but visibly. If you couldn't afford one, you could at least buy into its mythology. You could talk about it, sketch it, sew it into your napkins. One enterprising woman in Bath wore a tiny glass pineapple on a ribbon around her neck. Was it gaudy? Yes. Was it iconic? Also yes. However, not everyone was lucky enough to taste the sweet flesh of a pineapple. As the demand for these exotic fruits grew, So did their price. The scarcity of pineapples, coupled with the extraordinary effort required to grow them, meant that only the very wealthiest could afford to own one. A single pineapple could cost a small fortune. In fact, the price of a pineapple in the 18th century could be equivalent to a month's rent for an average English worker. But here's where things get a little bit more absurd. The wealthy, it turns out, didn't just want to own pineapples, they wanted to rent them. Yes, you heard that right. During the height of the pineapple craze, some Georgian landowners were so eager to flaunt their wealth and status that they would rent out pineapples for a day or two just so they could display them at parties. After the event was over, the fruit would be returned, often in a slightly less pristine condition. You can imagine the conversation. "Ah, yes, we had the pineapple on the table last night. It was quite lovely, wasn't it?" In some cases, pineapples were not even eaten at all. They were put on display at banquets and gatherings and admired for their exoticism and rarity. The fruit, having come such a long way, was too precious to be consumed. Instead, it served as a conversation piece, a conversation that could last long into the evening as guests discussed the amazing journey the pineapple had made from the jungles of the Caribbean to the drawing rooms of England. And while this practice might seem ridiculous, it actually reflects something deeper about the nature of wealth and status in Georgian England. It wasn't about enjoying the fruit for its taste. It was about controlling and displaying excess. You step into a Georgian drawing room now, the smell of beeswax and oversteeped tea filling your nostrils. There's a piano in the corner, a china dog on the mantel, and, of course, a pineapple displayed on a tall porcelain pedestal near the hearth, catching the flicker of firelight like some kind of fruity deity. How did we even get here? Well, to understand this whole pineapple obsession, you've got to rewind the clock a bit further, back before powdered wigs, before tea time, even before the invention of those tiny spoons that seem to do nothing. The pineapple's arrival in Europe reads like the opening of a romance novel, exotic, slow-burning, and way too expensive to maintain. The fruit's first grand European entrance came courtesy of Christopher Columbus, who stumbled across it in Guadeloupe around 1493. He and his crew were immediately enamored, probably because after months at sea, chewing moldy hardtack and vaguely rodent-flavored salted meat, anything vaguely juicy would have seemed divine. They called it Piña de Indes, the pine of the Indies, thanks to its resemblance to a pine cone with a mohawk. From there, the pineapple made a few diplomatic appearances across the courts of Europe, in Portugal, in Spain, in France, but nowhere did it really hit quite like it did in England, particularly during the Restoration and early Georgian periods. You could chalk this up to the British tendency to turn almost anything into a metaphor for empire. Tea, tobacco, sugar, and now fruit with a crown. By the late 1600s, the pineapple had become a diplomatic showpiece. Charles II famously posed in a painting while receiving one from his gardener, John Rose, a scene that's just as awkward as it sounds. Charles looks regal. The pineapple looks smug. And poor John Rose is probably thinking, "Please don't eat this." It took me 4 years to grow. Yes, 4 years. That's how long it could take to get one pineapple from seed to crown in England's moody climate. Not exactly fast food, and that's if everything went well, which, spoiler alert, it often didn't. The pineapple had evolved in Central and South America to love sunlight, humidity, and soil that didn't spend half the year sulking in a fog. So you can imagine the drama when early horticulturists tried to replicate those conditions in places like Yorkshire. They tried sunlight-reflecting walls, coal-fired hothouses, glass bell jars, and even sheep's wool insulation. It worked occasionally, but mostly it worked badly and expensively. Historians still argue whether the early English-grown pineapples were truly edible or just passable imitations of their tropical cousins. Some sources say they were woody and sour. Others insist they were triumphs of taste and smell. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, good enough to impress the neighbors, but not good enough to make you risk the dental bill. But here's the thing, the pineapple didn't need to taste good, it just needed to exist. And better yet, it needed to exist visibly. That visibility started taking shape in the late 1600s and early 1700s, when pineapples became prized gifts among the nobility. If you brought a pineapple to someone's estate, you weren't just bringing fruit, you were bringing social capital. You might as well be handing over a Fabergé egg or a gold Rolex. Sometimes the fruit wouldn't even leave your hands. You just show it to the host and then take it home again, like a terribly awkward baby picture. And if you really wanted to win points, you displayed one at dinner without letting anyone eat it. That was the peak of Georgian etiquette. Nothing said, I am unreasonably wealthy, quite like denying dessert on principle. You lean closer to the pedestal now, looking at the pineapple's ridged skin, its slightly curling leaves. You wonder if it's even real. Some pineapples, after all, were glazed with wax or lacquered with resin just to preserve the illusion. Real or not, the effect is the same. This is a statement. This fruit is a mic drop. But let's not forget where pineapples actually came from. Before they were status symbols in London, they were sacred in parts of South America. The Tupi-Guarani peoples cultivated and revered them. The Mayans may have used them in rituals. They were sustenance, medicine, and spiritual offering rolled into one. And yet, by the 1700s, the same fruit had become a kind of edible celebrity in Britain, flashed at parties, painted into murals, and hoarded in pantries like royal heirlooms. There's something deeply ironic in the way this humble tropical fruit became a stand-in for European power and wealth, especially when you consider how many pineapples were shipped across oceans by enslaved laborers under colonial rule. That part doesn't get mentioned in polite Georgian company. No one wants to discuss how their fruit trophy made it to the banquet, but you can't unsee it now. You picture the plantations in the Caribbean, the backbreaking labor, the stifling sun, all of it packaged and sent off to become someone's weekend centerpiece in Bath. There's even evidence that some aristocrats preferred imported pineapples, precisely because they came from colonies, because it reaffirmed their dominance. An imported pineapple was proof not just of taste, but of reach. It was a way of saying, look how far my appetite extends. You move away from the pedestal now and glance toward the garden, where a few potted plants sway gently in the breeze. One of them, a spiky little fellow in a clay pot, is probably another pineapple, not ripe, not ready, but full of potential. And in Georgian England, that was enough. One last detail floats to mind as you move through the house, a note from a visiting Frenchman in the 1750s who couldn't stop laughing at the English devotion to this violent little fruit. He wrote that the pineapple's taste hardly merits the hysteria, and that English society seemed to worship it more than understand it. He wasn't wrong. You settle into your chair, the crackling fire and the low hum of the evening washing over you. Your mind wanders back to the many ways that pineapples didn't just shape Georgian dinner parties, but entire social structures. Because as much as this fruit was about prestige and show, it was also about exclusion, and in the strangest way, this pineapple craze gave rise to a whole new industry, one built entirely on the desire to not have things. The very existence of the pineapple was predicated on this bizarre flip. The more unattainable it was, the more it became a symbol of societal success. There were no casual pineapple enthusiasts, no pineapple hobbyists. No one was strolling down to their local market, plopping down a few coins, and casually picking up a pineapple like they might an apple or a peach. The pineapple was above that, far, far above that. You can almost hear the clink of glasses in a drawing room, everyone murmuring about the latest shipment, and you begin to realize that there's something almost artificial about how pineapples became exclusive. They were valuable because people made them valuable. This wasn't just a fruit. This was an idea that society had locked behind an unbreakable glass case. In fact, it became so central to high society that many Englishmen and women took to creating pseudo-pineapples, sort of a cottage industry that was less about actual fruit and more about what it represented. The garden paths of the elite became lined with pineapple-shaped topiaries, and cabinet makers carved the pineapple into their furniture like a secret badge of honor. It wasn't about how many pineapples you owned. It was about how many symbols of pineapples you could fit into your life. Historians still debate whether this transformation, this obsession, was a product of Georgian materialism or simply a reflection of an era's desire to taste a slice of paradise in a place that often felt wet, cold, and slightly damp. It's almost as though the pineapple became a shared dream, a collective fantasy that could be displayed for the world to see. The truly wealthy might have actual pineapples, sent from colonies or grown by the lucky few who had a heated greenhouse. But for most people, it was enough to have a pineapple-shaped ornament hanging from the door or a painting of one on the wall. In some cases, people didn't even bother with the fruit at all. They commissioned pineapple parties where people wore pineapple-shaped hats and sipped pineapple-flavored beverages. By now, you begin to see a shift. This wasn't just an obsession with the fruit anymore. It had become a complete cultural package. Pineapples were woven into the social fabric in ways you might not even notice at first. A woman might wear a pineapple-shaped brooch to signal her social status. A nobleman might carve a pineapple motif into the frame of his carriage. And if you were really dedicated, you'd take your pineapple with you wherever you went, sometimes even in a special basket designed specifically for transporting it with all the care of an ancient relic. But not every attempt to use the pineapple as a status symbol was quite so subtle. No, some Georgian homeowners took it to the extreme. One wealthy family, desperate to make their estate the talk of London, reportedly hired a chef to prepare an elaborate pineapple banquet featuring all sorts of pineapple-infused dishes. But instead of slicing into a ripe fruit, the chef spent weeks constructing pineapple replicas out of sugar and marzipan, so perfectly detailed that they looked like the real thing. Historians still argue whether this stunt was a ridiculous waste of time or a stroke of genius. Was the goal simply to impress, or was it to drive home the point that you could have anything, even a fake pineapple, and people would still envy you? As much as the fruit itself was expensive and rare, it was often the aesthetic of the pineapple that was truly coveted. People decorated everything from their porcelain teacups to their garden gates with pineapple motifs, all in a desperate effort to maintain their image of opulence. Even the simplest domestic items, the teapots, the pitchers, the sugar bowls, were graced with tiny etched pineapples, tiny symbols of the owner's superiority. But there were darker sides to this pineapple worship. The obsession bred a sort of madness. People would often do anything to acquire one, even if they didn't quite know how to handle it once it was in their possession. Some folks would resort to paying the equivalent of a year's wages just to bring one to their table. Others would literally rent a pineapple for an evening, showcasing it to friends and neighbors with a slight air of smugness, only to return it once the evening was over, like a borrowed jewel. And then there were the people who tried to counterfeit them altogether. Some inventive types began attempting to grow their own pineapples, but the conditions were rarely right. The most successful attempts involved greenhouses, hothouses made specifically for creating that perfect balance of warmth and humidity. In fact, the term pineapple house began to crop up, and these were often built on grand estates, not for fruit necessarily, but for bragging rights. Pineapple houses became part of the landscape, woven into the very architecture of aristocratic gardens. You might find a small cluster of these greenhouses tucked away in the corner of an estate, as much a symbol of wealth as the grand ballroom or the view from the terrace. A pineapple house wasn't just a practical greenhouse, it was a statement. I can grow the rarest fruit in Europe, and you can't. And it wasn't just the rich who were obsessed. Even the emerging middle class got caught up in the craze, desperately trying to keep up with the aesthetic. You might find a baker's wife proudly displaying a painted pineapple on her doorstep, the yellow and green paint so bright it could have been a beacon for ships. Or perhaps a middle-tier merchant would subtly add a pineapple motif to his shopfront, positioning himself as someone who was almost in the same league as the aristocracy. And so, as you lean back, you begin to understand how this one simple fruit, the pineapple, became a gateway to social division. The world didn't just want the pineapple, it wanted what the pineapple meant. And for Georgian England, that meant one thing: power. The power to say, I have what you do not. And that power, as you'll see, would continue to ripple through centuries of British society. You've now settled deeper into the story. Imagine the grandeur of a lavish Georgian banquet hall. The long table is draped in fine linen, surrounded by guests draped in equally fine silks and satins, their laughter floating through the air like champagne bubbles. And what's at the center of the table? The mighty pineapple, of course. But this isn't just any pineapple. This one is perched like a crown jewel among all the finest dishes. It's the piece de resistance, a showstopper that defines the entire gathering. You're probably wondering how this fruit went from being something you could grow if you had a greenhouse and a small fortune to something so ubiquitous that it graced almost every banquet in Georgian England. The shift happened slowly but inevitably, almost like a party you weren't entirely invited to, but somehow ended up attending anyway. By the mid-1700s, pineapples weren't just showing up on tables as symbols of wealth, they were becoming a sign of hospitality. More specifically, they were used to signal a generosity that was almost royal in its excess. If you were a host with a pineapple on the table, it wasn't just a fancy fruit, it was an invitation for everyone in the room to consider themselves at the very peak of luxury. To serve a pineapple was to say, I can afford this, which, as you can imagine, was an invitation not just to taste the fruit, but to share in the wealth and prestige of the home. The pineapple was, in many ways, the Georgian equivalent of what we might consider an Instagram moment today. You know the ones, those perfectly curated, effortlessly chic photos of lavish spreads and decadent displays. But in the 18th century, the medium was real life, and the message was as clear as the finest crystal. I have a pineapple. You don't. And now I've invited you to my world. This level of hospitality had practical roots, of course. Hosts were expected to outdo one another. The concept of the banquet was more than just a dinner. It was a performance, a way of presenting your wealth, your sophistication, and your cultural awareness to those who were lucky enough to be invited. And within that performance, the pineapple had earned its place at the star of the show. But that's where the humor of it all comes in. Because while the pineapple was an unmistakable statement of wealth, it was also a bit of a dangerous gamble. You see, not everyone had access to these rare fruits. Certainly not everyone could afford one. So, how could you show that you were truly wealthy? The trick was not only having a pineapple, but making sure you had one that didn't actually get eaten. Imagine this. A guest arrives at a dinner, and what do they see? A table set with the most sumptuous of foods. The finest meats, the creamiest cheeses, the freshest vegetables, and nestled at the center, a pineapple, ripe and golden, just begging to be sliced into. But this pineapple never makes it past its role as decoration. It's there purely to say, look at me. I'm so rich I don't need to eat this fruit. You, however, can admire it from a distance. There's something wonderfully absurd about this. The whole concept of using food as a symbol of excess was taken to such extremes that the fruit itself, the very thing that was supposed to symbolize generosity, became an elaborate form of showing off. Historians still argue whether this was a cynical reflection of a society obsessed with its own image, or whether it reflected the true values of hospitality and good taste. But even the true meaning of the pineapple was murky. Was it about taste, or was it about showing taste? In a world where luxury was a performance as much as it was an experience, the pineapple's presence at a table could be seen as one big, beautiful, delicious lie. You might sit at the table surrounded by the finest foods and the juiciest of fruits, but all the while, the most coveted item in the room was likely to be the one that remained untouched, never meant to be savored, just admired. The elite understood this more than anyone. They understood that the value of something lay in its rarity, and the pineapple had become so rare that it was beyond the realms of necessity or nourishment. It was an object that demanded attention and admiration, but not necessarily consumption. And in its rarity, it created a sense of mystique, of power. To serve a pineapple was to serve an air of mystique, a promise of wealth so excessive that it transcended the very idea of nourishment. But don't be fooled. Not everyone was impressed by this spectacle. The growing middle class, which had started to develop its own sense of identity in the Georgian era, saw this obsession with pineapples as both extravagant and slightly ridiculous. They'd happily eat their own fruit, thank you very much, without turning it into a social event. But there were still the occasional risque moments, like when a pineapple might be sent to a local tavern to make a statement. Imagine walking into a pub, just looking for a pint and spotting a pineapple. "Ah, so you're a man of taste," the innkeeper might say. It's hard to say whether that's a compliment or an insult. Regardless, the more the pineapple became a marker of wealth, the more it cemented its place in history, not just as a fruit, but as a symbol of societal values and aspirations. And this, oddly enough, is where the pineapple truly begins to take on its curious second life, a symbol of something entirely different from what it once was in the rainforests of South America. You might picture it now sitting proudly on a banquet table, with the soft flicker of candlelight casting shadows over its spiky skin. In that moment, it was more than a fruit. It was an object of desire, something that tantalized, teased, and told you everything about the people who possessed it. You settle further into the rhythm of this peculiar history, your mind drifting like smoke through the ages. Now picture yourself walking through a Georgian greenhouse, the soft hum of bees and the fragrant scent of damp soil filling the air. You're surrounded by warm glass walls that trap heat and sunlight, an oasis of green tucked away in the corner of an aristocratic estate. And in the center of this greenhouse, sitting with the quiet dignity of a monarch, is the crown jewel, a single radiant pineapple. What you're seeing is the height of luxury, a symbol of wealth that has been nurtured and cared for with meticulous care. These greenhouses, called pineapple houses, were in fact much more than mere garden structures. They were a feat of engineering, carefully designed to create the perfect growing environment for the tropical fruit. Imagine being in charge of such a greenhouse where every temperature shift, every drop of water, every piece of manure had to be perfectly balanced. A single mistake and the precious fruit could spoil. But despite the best efforts of these botanical pioneers, the process of growing pineapples was no easy feat. The plant required a unique combination of warmth, humidity, and soil, conditions that weren't naturally available in most of England. As you walk through the cool, steamy air of the greenhouse, you realize how much these wealthy landowners were willing to invest in something that, at the time, seemed like a luxury reserved only for the nobility. The greenhouses became essential for wealthy landowners who wanted to flaunt their wealth, but there was more to it than just demonstrating their ability to own a pineapple. These structures were filled with the pride of achievement. They were places of experimentation, innovation, and passion, where scientists and gardeners alike worked tirelessly to cultivate this exotic fruit in the heart of England's countryside. But behind all the lush greenery, there was an underlying sense of competition, each greenhouse owner trying to grow the most perfect, most impressive pineapple. The rivalry became so intense that gardeners would often trade tips, tricks, and secret methods on how to maintain the delicate balance required to produce the fruit. In many ways, this competition reflects the very spirit of Georgian society, a time where appearances mattered and people were more than willing to invest great sums to prove their worth. Pineapples became not only the ultimate status symbol, but also a way for landowners to show that they were not only wealthy, but also scientifically and horticulturally savvy. The more perfect the fruit, the more attention it garnered, and the greater the social cachet. But even more than that, the pineapple houses revealed something deeper about the Georgian fascination with the exotic and the far off. To grow a pineapple was to bring a piece of the new world, of tropical paradise, into the damp, gray landscape of England. And this sense of the exotic wasn't limited to just the pineapple. It was a recurring theme in Georgian society, from fashion to furniture. Exotic goods were all the rage, but none more so than the fruit that was painstakingly cultivated by the elite. This is where things take an interesting turn, because while the upper echelons of Georgian society were obsessively focused on growing pineapples, the rest of society, especially the working class, wasn't so sure about this extravagant obsession. They knew that pineapples were rare and expensive, but that didn't stop some of them from having a bit of fun at the expense of the wealthy. Take, for example, the rise of the pineapple party. This was a strange yet fascinating social ritual, where people would gather to admire the fruit and then do nothing. The pineapple would sit on display, untouched, often surrounded by an army of guests who were allowed to gaze at it but not eat it. It was an elaborate exercise in showing off, a party where the fruit itself wasn't the centerpiece of consumption, but the centerpiece of admiration. The host, in essence, was saying, "Look at me, look at my wealth, look at my access to the unattainable." This peculiar practice highlights the performative aspect of the Georgian elite. A pineapple party wasn't a simple gathering. It was a carefully choreographed dance of social signaling, and while the pineapple may have been the literal fruit of excess, it also represented the excess of social display. Guests would ooh and ah over the pineapple, but no one would dare touch it. That act of not consuming it was a key part of the ritual. This spectacle didn't just stop at the parties. As you begin to look more closely at this culture, it becomes clear that pineapples were popping up in the strangest places. For example, you might find pineapple-shaped handles on silverware, pineapple motifs on embroidered linens, and even the distinctive shape of a pineapple woven into the architecture of the homes of the wealthy. The desire to display the pineapple shape, even in abstract forms, became almost an obsession of its own. Historians still debate whether the constant need to display these symbols was a byproduct of an era obsessed with outward shows of power, or if it was a more subtle expression of the Georgian thirst for perfection. What's certain is that pineapples quickly became ubiquitous in the most unexpected ways. From serving trays to teapots, from wallpaper to gateposts, pineapples were everywhere. The fruit had wormed its way into the very texture of society, leaving its imprint not only on people's plates but on their identities. But while all of this might sound like a fairy tale of a bygone, simpler age, it wasn't without its challenges. There were rumors and myths about the true origins of the pineapple's power, stories of rare diseases or hidden curses associated with the fruit's exotic nature. The most fascinating of these rumors, though, wasn't about the fruit itself, but about the people who sought it. For example, it was believed by some that only the truly elite could handle the spiritual weight of a pineapple, that ordinary folk simply weren't equipped to possess such a thing. Whether these rumors were just whimsical or held some kernel of truth is hard to say, but what's certain is that the pineapple, much like the people who cherished it, was shrouded in mystery and mystery alone. And as its presence spread throughout England, so too did its enigmatic allure. The pineapple, both as a fruit and as a concept, had transcended the physical world and entered the realm of the mythical. At this point, the pineapple's place in Georgian society is crystal clear. It's no longer just a fruit, it's an experience, a symbol, a conversation piece. But now, let's pull back the curtain a little and take a look at the strange and winding journey that pineapples had to take to make it all the way from the tropical jungles of the Americas to the salons of Georgian England. The story of how this fruit became so coveted begins with its introduction to European shores, and the tale is far more dramatic and entertaining than you might expect. It starts, like many historical sagas, with a bit of serendipity. When Christopher Columbus and his crew landed in the Caribbean in 1493, they encountered the indigenous Taino people who were already cultivating the pineapple, but Columbus, ever the opportunist, wasn't quite sure what to make of this odd fruit. His men recorded their first encounter with the pineapple with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, strange, prickly, and rather alarming, they noted in their journals. But what Columbus didn't realize at the time was that this strange fruit was about to revolutionize European notions of wealth, luxury, and taste. In fact, Columbus's crew brought the first pineapples back to Europe, where they became something of a curiosity in the courts of Spain and Portugal. But getting a pineapple to grow outside of its native environment was no small feat. In those early days, the fruit was a rare commodity. Too rare, really. It wasn't until the 17th century that European horticulturists really began to figure out how to grow them on a larger scale, and by then, the pineapple had already become a symbol of status. But let's pause for a moment to consider the sheer audacity of those early attempts at growing pineapples in England. Growing a pineapple in Georgian England wasn't like planting an apple tree in your garden. No, to cultivate this exotic treasure required immense skill, patience, and, most importantly, money. The earliest attempts were nothing short of bizarre. The first greenhouses were heated by fermenting manure. Yes, you read that right. The warmth from the decomposing manure would generate heat that could keep the pineapple plants toasty during those long, cold English winters. It was an agricultural miracle of sorts, but also deeply uncomfortable for the poor gardeners who had to tend to the pineapples amidst the pungent, rotting heaps of dung. Historians still argue about whether or not this early method of manure heating was the most effective way to grow pineapples. Some argue that the peculiar stench might have been worth it for the fruit's delicious reward, while others claim the whole process was a bit of a failure. Regardless, this early method of cultivation set the stage for a new obsession, the race to grow the perfect pineapple, and it wasn't long before England's elite, including the royals, became infatuated with the idea of having their own personal pineapples growing in the backyard. Now, let's talk about the real struggle of growing pineapples: transportation. After all, getting the fruit from the tropical climes of the Caribbean to England was no small feat. As you might expect, pineapples, with their delicate skin and juicy interior, were prone to spoilage. To ensure they made it to the dinner table in one piece, pineapples had to be transported carefully, often in special boxes lined with straw or other protective materials. The journey across the Atlantic was a hazardous one, and many pineapples never survived the trip. But when they did make it to England, their arrival was nothing short of a triumph. They were treated almost like prized trophies, displayed in grand manor houses for all to see. However, not everyone was lucky enough to taste the sweet flesh of a pineapple. As the demand for these exotic fruits grew, so did their price. The scarcity of pineapples, coupled with the extraordinary effort required to grow them, meant that only the very wealthiest could afford to own one. A single pineapple could cost a small fortune. In fact, the price of a pineapple in the 18th century could be equivalent to a month's rent for an average English worker. But here's where things get a little bit more absurd. The wealthy, it turns out, didn't just want to own pineapples, they wanted to rent them. Yes, you heard that right. During the height of the pineapple craze, some Georgian landowners were so eager to flaunt their wealth and status that they would rent out pineapples for a day or two just so they could display them at parties. After the event was over, the fruit would be returned, often in a slightly less pristine condition. You can imagine the conversation. "Ah, yes, we had the pineapple on the table last night. It was quite lovely, wasn't it?" In some cases, pineapples were not even eaten at all. They were put on display at banquets and gatherings and admired for their exoticism and rarity. The fruit, having come such a long way, was too precious to be consumed. Instead, it served as a conversation piece, a conversation that could last long into the evening as guests discussed the amazing journey the pineapple had made from the jungles of the Caribbean to the drawing rooms of England. And while this practice might seem ridiculous, it actually reflects something deeper about the nature of wealth and status in Georgian England. It wasn't about enjoying the fruit for its taste. It was about controlling and displaying excess. Pineapples were an embodiment of that excess, and as such, their owners were more than willing to indulge in the spectacle of showing off. So, there you are, standing in a Georgian dining room, admiring a pineapple in all its prickly, tropical glory. You might not eat it, but you'll certainly tell the story of how this tiny piece of the Caribbean made it all the way to your table. And for a moment, it's not just a fruit, it's a piece of history. Historians continue to debate whether this obsession with pineapples was a symptom of the aristocracy's obsession with displaying wealth, or if it was an honest attempt to bring the splendor of the exotic into everyday life. What's clear is that the pineapple's legacy is a reminder of how people throughout history have used food as a symbol of power, identity, and exclusivity. Let's take a deep breath as we slow the pace, imagine the gentle rustle of the greenhouse leaves once again, and step into the dazzling world of the Georgian elite, pineapple in hand. It's a world where power and prestige are intertwined with every breath, every glance at that tropical fruit. But, as you've probably guessed by now, the pineapple's reign wasn't just a fleeting trend. The obsession with this fruit permeated all levels of society and reached even deeper into the world of art, fashion, and architecture. Yes, you read that right. Pineapples weren't just limited to the dinner table or garden. They became an enduring motif in Georgian art and design. Picture it now. You're strolling through the grand halls of a Georgian estate where the ornate architecture gleams with intricately carved marble and woodwork. There, on the delicate porcelain china, you see it, the pineapple. Not just in one place, but in every room, etched into the porcelain of teacups, embroidered into the fabric of cushions, and quite often carved into the very stonework of fireplaces and doorways. This obsession with the pineapple, interestingly, didn't just signify exoticism and wealth. It was also seen as a symbol of hospitality and warmth. The pineapple's distinctive shape, its crown-like top and prickled exterior, was thought to evoke a sense of welcoming abundance. A visitor walking into a Georgian home would be met with pineapples everywhere, from table settings to the very walls. This was no coincidence. In fact, some historians argue that the pineapple's symbolism of hospitality and generosity was more important than its actual taste or rarity. People weren't just drawn to the fruit because it was rare. They were drawn to it because it represented something larger than itself. An open door, a warm hearth, a place of plenty, and it doesn't stop there. The pineapple, as an emblem of affluence and grandeur, found its way into Georgian fashion. You're now at a grand banquet, the kind where silk dresses swirl and powdered wigs bounce with every step. And then, you notice something curious, a woman's gown adorned with a delicate golden pineapple at the hem, or a man's waistcoat embroidered with a bright, tropical design. This wasn't simply a decorative choice. It was a statement. The pineapple was woven into the very fabric of society, appearing on the clothing of those who could afford to make such a statement. The wealthy weren't just owning pineapples, they were wearing them too. Historians still debate whether this sartorial trend was a form of humble bragging or a genuine desire to reflect the Georgian virtue of hospitality in their daily lives. Was it about flaunting one's wealth to the world, or was it a subtler expression of social values? Whatever the answer, it's clear that the pineapple's influence stretched beyond the garden and dining table. It became an undeniable presence in the public sphere, woven into every thread of high society. But even with all this luxury, we can't ignore the darker side of this pineapple obsession. Because, as with all things associated with wealth, There were those who took the trend to an absurd extreme. Let's return to the pineapple parties we discussed earlier. These extravagant events were, in a way, not just about the display of wealth, but also about how ridiculous one could make that display. And one of the most outlandish examples of this was the so-called pineapple tasting parties. Imagine it. You've been invited to one of the grandest gatherings in the land, and there you are, seated at an opulent table surrounded by the creme de la creme of society. The pineapple, prized for its rarity and extravagance, sits in the center of the room. But there's a twist. Instead of actually eating it, guests are encouraged to taste it in the most elaborate, over-the-top ways imaginable. Some parties featured a pineapple sniffing contest, where guests would sniff the fruit deeply before offering their opinions on its scent, as though they were connoisseurs of fine wine. Others created entire rituals around savoring the fruit, carefully inspecting its surface, touching it delicately, and then moving on without actually biting into it. It sounds absurd, but the truth is that these parties weren't just about the fruit, they were about the performance. The act of not eating the pineapple, of treating it like some sort of sacred object, reflected the very essence of Georgian excess. It wasn't about satisfying hunger or enjoying a sweet treat. It was about reverence. The pineapple had transformed from a mere fruit into a symbol of unattainable luxury, a reminder of a world where wealth was so abundant that food no longer served its primary purpose. It was just another tool in the grand game of social prestige. Historians still argue about the social psychology behind these pineapple rituals. Some believe they were a way for the elite to solidify their power over the common folk, making an overt display of their ability to indulge in excess without any regard for practicality. Others suggest that these parties were a form of self-aware satire, where the very absurdity of the ritual exposed the artificial nature of the elite's social structures. Either way, the pineapple's role in Georgian society became increasingly theatrical, a symbol of a world where appearances were everything and excess had no boundaries. But as all things do, this pineapple obsession eventually began to wane. The fruit, once a rare and coveted symbol of opulence, slowly started to lose its status. More efficient methods of cultivation, both in the Caribbean and in the greenhouses of England, led to a surplus of pineapples, and their rarity lost its edge. The craze cooled, and as the Georgian era drew to a close, the pineapple, while still prized, became just another fashionable food item, no longer a divine, untouchable symbol of wealth and excess. Historians still argue over the precise moment when the pineapple craze began to fade. Some point to the rise of new culinary trends in the late 18th century, while others suggest that the increase in pineapple production made it too commonplace to be a reliable symbol of status. Regardless of the reason, the pineapple's reign in Georgian society had an undeniable impact on the way food, wealth, and social status were intertwined in the public consciousness. Now, you're sitting back, reflecting on all of this. You might chuckle at the absurdity of it all, or perhaps you're mesmerized by the strange ways in which food can shape the course of history. Either way, you can't help but appreciate the pineapple's journey from tropical fruit to a symbol of opulence and excess. Now that you've gotten a glimpse of the lavish, almost absurd world in which pineapples were treated like gold, let's dive deeper into the legacy of this exotic fruit. The obsession with pineapples didn't simply fade into history like some passing fashion. No, it left a mark, one that can still be found today, woven into the fabric of modern culture. The pineapple, once a symbol of unattainable luxury, eventually found its way into the homes of everyday people and became a staple of social life in different forms. But how did this transition happen? And what does it say about the ways we still value certain foods today? Let's take a moment to reflect on the peculiar longevity of the pineapple's influence. By the time the Georgian era wound down, the fruit's mystique had already been diluted. Yet even as pineapples became more accessible in the 19th century, they still carried with them the echoes of their former grandeur. And though the most absurd rituals surrounding the pineapple slowly fell away, its presence continued to be felt in a variety of new forms. Fast forward to the Victorian period, when the pineapple, now less of a symbol of wealth and more of a symbol of refinement, became a common motif in the home. The Victorian middle class, obsessed with propriety and decorum, used the pineapple as a decorative element in their homes, adorning everything from wallpaper to door knockers. The pineapple had once been the ultimate status symbol, but now it was a sign of gentility, of good taste. even for those who had never come close to a tropical island. No longer was the fruit reserved for the elite. It had evolved into a marker of refined living that everyone could claim in one way or another. Interestingly, the Victorian obsession with the pineapple wasn't entirely different from the Georgian obsession. It was still about presenting an image, showing the world that you were well-traveled, cultured, and wealthy in a certain subtle way. But the difference was that, by the time the Victorians adopted the fruit as their own, it had shed much of the mystique and exclusivity it once held. Pineapples were no longer displayed only in grand estates or at elaborate banquets. They were showing up in the homes of middle-class families, on their furniture, curtains, and even their dinner plates. Historians argue that the way the pineapple moved from the realm of luxury to the realm of the accessible is a fascinating reflection of the broader changes happening during the 19th century. With the rise of industrialization and the expansion of trade, items that were once deemed exotic and out of reach slowly became more obtainable. Food, in particular, became less about status and more about personal pleasure. The pineapple's transition from elite symbol to everyday item mirrors the way society was shifting during this period, toward the democratization of wealth, goods, and status. But the pineapple's legacy didn't end with the Victorians. By the 20th century, the fruit had become a mainstay in the global culinary scene. It was no longer just a decorative item in the drawing room. It had found its way into grocery stores, fruit baskets, and kitchens worldwide. The pineapple became a symbol of the tropics, a symbol of leisure, warmth, and escape. You can almost hear the soft, gentle waves crashing against the shore, the scent of salty sea air mixing with the sweetness of the fruit. In this new world, pineapples weren't just symbols of wealth or refinement, they were symbols of paradise itself. But here's a fascinating twist. Even as the pineapple became more commonplace, its historical role as a symbol of affluence continued to influence how it was perceived in popular culture. Take a look at any 20th century design, from the Art Deco movement to the mid-century modern aesthetic, and you'll find that the pineapple's image was used to evoke a sense of high-end luxury and glamorous tropical retreats. Even as it became a fruit available to anyone with a few dollars in their pocket, the pineapple's historical connotations of extravagance stuck with it. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a pineapple design on anything that wasn't trying to signal something luxurious or festive? From high-end restaurants to poolside cocktails, the pineapple's legacy as a fancy symbol lives on. When you sip a piña colada on vacation, part of what you're enjoying is not just the drink, but the subtle echo of that long-dead Georgian opulence. In a strange way, the pineapple has become a symbol not just of wealth, but of vacationing wealth, the kind of wealth that lets you float leisurely through a tropical paradise with no responsibilities in sight. Historians still argue over the reasons why the pineapple, out of all the exotic fruits in the world, became the centerpiece of such a grand social narrative. Some suggest that the pineapple's striking appearance, its spiky crown and uniquely textured surface, helped it stand out, making it an ideal symbol for those wanting to make an impact. Others argue that it was simply a case of timing. At the moment the pineapple was introduced to Europe, it was at the right place, at the right time, and the right level of exoticism to become the fruit of choice for the powerful and wealthy. Whatever the reason, it's clear that the pineapple's history is about more than just its flesh. It's about the role it played in shaping social customs, in elevating what it means to have it all. And of course, even today, the pineapple's allure hasn't fully waned. Though it's no longer the rare, precious item it once was, it remains a symbol of enjoyment, relaxation, and indulgence. The humble pineapple has transformed from an inaccessible luxury to a symbol of leisure, embodying our desire for escape, comfort, and a touch of the tropical paradise that once only the very rich could afford. As you reflect on all of this, perhaps it's not so difficult to see why the pineapple held such a firm grip on the imagination of those who lived centuries ago. It wasn't just a fruit, it was a living testament to the intricate dance between food, power, and society. And as you close your eyes tonight, it's fascinating to think about how something as simple as a fruit could change the course of history and continue to shape our ideas of what it means to live well. Now that you've seen how the pineapple moved through the hands of the elite down to the masses, let's take a moment to look at something equally fascinating: how this once rare fruit has been embraced by cultures around the world. The Georgian obsession, after all, wasn't the last time the pineapple took center stage in human history. This tropical fruit didn't just make a mark in Europe, it also found its way into the cuisines, rituals, and designs of countries across the globe, each culture adapting it to its own tastes, needs, and desires. First, let's head to the Caribbean, where the pineapple originally hailed from. In the warm, sun-drenched islands of the West Indies, the pineapple was, and still is, a symbol of bounty and abundance, but its role in Caribbean culture goes beyond just being a sweet, refreshing fruit. Pineapples have played a significant role in shaping local traditions and festivals. Picture this: a vibrant market on a sunlit morning, the air thick with the smell of ripe fruits and spices. The pineapple, with its golden yellow flesh and spiky crown, sits at the heart of the scene, often as part of ceremonial offerings or as a centerpiece in celebratory feasts. It's not merely the fruit itself that's important, but the very act of sharing it. The pineapple in many Caribbean cultures is a symbol of communal joy, often shared at weddings, festivals, and family gatherings. It's a fruit that embodies generosity and connection, offering a sweet, tangible reminder of the bonds between people. But there's another side to the pineapple that's particularly striking, and that's its influence in South and Southeast Asia. As the pineapple made its way across the globe via trade routes, it encountered cultures with deeply embedded rituals and symbolic meanings tied to food. In places like Thailand, the Philippines, and India, the pineapple has become much more than a mere fruit to be eaten. It has, over time, taken on spiritual significance. In certain traditions, the pineapple is viewed as a symbol of prosperity, good fortune, and protection against evil spirits. In the Philippines, for example, the fruit is sometimes used in ritual offerings, believed to carry the power to ward off negativity and bring good luck to a household. This ties into a broader cultural practice in which the pineapple's unusual shape and exotic origin make it a potent symbol of magical protection and positivity. And then there's the use of pineapple in local cuisine. While it may seem like a strange leap from its original association with elite dinner parties in England, the pineapple soon became a beloved ingredient in dishes across the globe. In Southeast Asia, it's often used in savory dishes, balancing out spicy and tangy flavors. Pineapple fried rice, for instance, is a beloved dish in Thailand. Rice cooked with shrimp, chicken, and pineapple chunks, all tossed together in a savory sweet sauce. The pineapple adds a sharp sweetness that complements the rich spices and savory ingredients. In the Philippines, pineapple plays a key role in a traditional dish called lechon, which is roasted pork stuffed with pineapple to enhance its sweetness and tenderness. What's fascinating here is that the pineapple, in all its tropical sweetness, has evolved into a beloved, versatile ingredient in cultures around the world. It has journeyed from a symbol of the elite in the West to a key player in international cuisine, celebrated for both its taste and its cultural significance. It is now, in many ways, a global unifier, a fruit that, despite its early associations with wealth, has found a place in kitchens and hearts worldwide. Historians still debate how the pineapple managed to weave itself so seamlessly into such diverse cultures. Some point to its early use in trade routes and its broad appeal as a sweet and refreshing fruit, while others suggest that it was its exotic nature, its foreign, tropical origin, that gave it a symbolic weight in different societies. But what is undeniable is that the pineapple managed to transcend its initial symbolism of luxury, eventually settling into a new role as a universally appreciated fruit. Meanwhile, back in the Western world, particularly in the United States, the pineapple has undergone yet another transformation. You might not be aware of it, but the fruit's image has remained a fixture in the American South, where it has become a symbol of Southern hospitality and warmth. Picture yourself walking into a stately Southern home, the scent of magnolia and fresh bread lingering in the air. As you step inside, you spot the unmistakable symbol of the pineapple, engraved on the doorframe or prominently placed on the front porch. Here, the pineapple isn't just an ornamental object, it's a welcoming sign, an invitation to guests that they are appreciated and cared for. This tradition of using the pineapple as a symbol of hospitality can still be seen in many Southern homes today, often as a decorative piece of art or even as part of architectural designs. It's fascinating to think that this symbol, which began in the opulent halls of Georgian England, has now become a hallmark of homey, down-to-earth warmth in the American South. The pineapple's journey from luxury to the symbol of hospitality and community isn't just a historical curiosity. It speaks to a larger story of how symbols of wealth and prestige eventually become more democratic, accessible to all people. The pineapple's rich history, spanning centuries, continents, and cultures, shows how the meaning of food can shift over time, adapting to the changing tastes, needs, and values of societies. As we draw closer to the conclusion of this pineapple journey, it's important to consider one last curious element of the fruit's legacy: its continued role in contemporary visual culture. The pineapple, believe it or not, has become a design icon. If you've spent any time on social media, in trendy cafes, or even in your own living room, you may have noticed a rising trend in pineapple-themed decor. Yes, the fruit that once symbolized the height of Georgian aristocracy now shows up in everything from throw pillows to wallpaper, mugs, and even street art. But how did this humble fruit, once revered as a rare commodity, make its way into the hearts of modern interior designers and Instagram influencers? The answer lies partly in nostalgia. There's something inherently charming about the pineapple's history, and in a world filled with modern luxury and mass-produced items, many people are drawn to the fruit as a symbol of simpler, more elegant times. The pineapple, once a luxury reserved for the elite, now serves as a gentle reminder of times past, when social gatherings were grand and displaying rare fruits at dinner parties was considered the height of sophistication. This nostalgic appeal has made the pineapple a popular design element in homes across the world. Whether it's a glossy gold pineapple sculpture on a coffee table or a quirky pineapple print on a piece of clothing, the fruit's association with exclusivity and charm still resonates today. This pineapple craze, however, isn't just a passing fad. There's a deeper significance to why the pineapple has remained such a beloved symbol in modern design. It's all about warmth, welcome, and hospitality. In many cultures, the pineapple continues to be seen as a symbol of openness and generosity. In the United States, for instance, it's common to see a pineapple motif at the entrance of a home, often carved into a wooden plaque or made into a decorative piece of artwork. This symbolism of hospitality is so ingrained in modern culture that the pineapple, often associated with Southern traditions, has become a fixture of welcoming decor across the globe. It's a reminder that no matter how sophisticated or far-reaching its past, the pineapple has always been about connection, a shared joy, an invitation to sit and stay a while. The pineapple's modern role as a symbol of hospitality and warmth is not just restricted to home decor. In the world of food and beverage, the pineapple continues to be a favorite ingredient in luxury items. Think of pineapple-flavored cocktails in exclusive bars, or the ever-popular pineapple cake at high-end bakeries. These contemporary culinary delights build on the pineapple's historic reputation as an indulgence reserved for the elite. Yet today, its appearance in everyday items suggests something else: accessibility. Now, the pineapple is no longer just for the wealthy. It has become a symbol of celebration and gathering, a fruit that's as much a part of an intimate dinner party as it is of a large, festive banquet. And in the realm of entertainment, the pineapple continues to hold a special place, particularly when it comes to visual aesthetics. Think of the tropical themes that permeate vacation destinations, bars, and even music videos. The pineapple's unmistakable shape and vibrant color make it a visual cue for relaxation, indulgence, and fun. It's the fruit that signals a carefree attitude, a laid-back spirit, and a willingness to embrace life's pleasures. In a way, the pineapple represents a timeless form of escapism, an invitation to unwind, to bask in the golden glow of an exotic paradise, no matter where you are. Historians still debate whether the modern fascination with the pineapple is part of a larger trend of retro revivalism, or whether it's simply an enduring symbol that transcends its historical significance. Some argue that the pineapple has retained its allure because it's always been a symbol of abundance, warmth, and generosity, which are values that continue to resonate with people today. Others suggest that our collective desire to cling to symbols of old-world luxury, even in a mass-market world, is what keeps the pineapple in our visual vocabulary. Either way, the pineapple has managed to stay relevant, adaptable, and deeply embedded in the visual and cultural landscape of the modern world. Now, let's take a moment to consider the pineapple's role in literature too. Through the years, writers and poets have used the fruit as a metaphor for various themes, such as wealth, warmth, and exoticism. For instance, in some classic works of literature, the pineapple often serves as a symbol of something unattainable or out of reach, representing the yearning for a luxurious, opulent life. But more than just a symbol of unattainable wealth, the pineapple has also been used as a representation of hospitality and care. As we near the end of our pineapple journey, it's worth reflecting on how the fruit's image has continued to evolve, particularly in the modern world. Today, the pineapple is far from the exclusive symbol of wealth it once was in Georgian England. It's no longer reserved for the dinner tables of the aristocracy, nor does it serve as the extravagant centerpiece at high society banquets. Instead, it's become a ubiquitous and familiar part of our lives, featured in everything from tropical-themed cocktails to decor in beachside cottages. Yet, in this shift from the extraordinary to the everyday, the pineapple hasn't lost its charm. It's merely adapted to the times. Interestingly, the modern resurgence of interest in the pineapple can be attributed, in part, to its continued association with ideas of warmth, hospitality, and tropical paradise. The pineapple's image has been co-opted in ways that reflect the current era's obsession with escapism and relaxation. Think of how the fruit is often used in tourism advertising, evoking visions of sandy beaches, cocktails by the sea, and leisurely vacations. This connection to escape and indulgence has made the pineapple a symbol not just of luxury, but of leisure and comfort. It's the fruit of the tropical paradise, available to us all through our endless summers and vacations. In many ways, this shift from an exclusive luxury item to an everyday fruit is a reflection of the broader societal changes that have taken place over the centuries. As global trade and industrialization expanded throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, previously rare and exotic goods like pineapples became more accessible to people of all social classes. No longer the domain of the rich, pineapples could now be found in grocery stores across the world, from bustling city markets to quiet suburban neighborhoods. And this accessibility has only increased in the modern era, thanks to the global food supply chain, which ensures that pineapples are readily available year-round. But despite its transformation into a more common commodity, the pineapple still manages to carry a certain air of uniqueness. Its distinct shape, vibrant color, and sweet, tangy taste continue to evoke feelings of warmth and joy, no matter where or when it's enjoyed. Whether it's served fresh, canned, or as the centerpiece of a tropical fruit salad, the pineapple still carries that element of the exotic that first captivated Georgian society. Even in the most mundane of settings, a grocery store, a fruit basket, or a can of pineapple chunks, the fruit retains a sense of allure, a reminder of its once untouchable status. However, what's perhaps most intriguing about the pineapple's modern-day transformation is its role in pop culture. The fruit has become something of a cultural icon, appearing in art, fashion, and even tattoos. You'll find pineapple motifs on everything from home decor to clothing, often as a quirky or playful nod to its tropical roots. It's also become a fixture in social media trends and memes, where it's often used to symbolize fun, carefree living. The pineapple, in this sense, has become the fruit of choice for the Instagram generation, a symbol of abundance, celebration, and carefree enjoyment. This widespread use of the pineapple in pop culture only reinforces its ability to evolve and adapt over time. From a symbol of wealth and power to a casual emblem of tropical fun, the pineapple's image has been reshaped and reinterpreted by each generation. It's a testament to the fruit's remarkable ability to transcend its origins and take on new meanings as culture shifts and changes. No matter how it's used, whether as a luxury item, a symbol of paradise, or a playful motif, the pineapple retains its place in the collective imagination as a fruit that embodies joy, abundance, and the pleasures of life. Historians still debate the deeper implications of this shift in the pineapple's cultural role. Some see it as a reflection of how our values and priorities have changed over time, moving from an emphasis on exclusivity and wealth to a focus on comfort and leisure. Others argue that the pineapple's enduring popularity speaks to something more fundamental about human nature, our desire for connection to something beautiful, something rare, something that reminds us of the pleasures of life. The fact that the pineapple has been able to maintain its appeal, despite its fall from its lofty status as a symbol of aristocracy, is a proof of its timeless allure. As we reach the final chapter of our pineapple journey, it's hard not to marvel at how such a humble fruit could capture the imaginations of so many, spanning centuries and continents. From the foggy cobblestone streets of Georgian England to the sun-drenched tropics, the pineapple has been more than just a fruit. It's been a symbol of humanity's drive to adapt, experiment, and perhaps most of all, to dream. It's a symbol of what happens when people push the boundaries of the possible, when they transform the unattainable into the ordinary. But what of the future of the pineapple? In many ways, we've reached a point where the fruit no longer carries the same weight of exclusivity or social prestige that it once did. Gone are the days when a single pineapple could cost the equivalent of an entire year's wages for an average worker. Today, pineapples are available in grocery stores across the world, their once rare status now relegated to the past. But even though the pineapple has become more accessible, its mystique has not entirely disappeared. The exotic appeal of the tropical fruit remains, albeit in a different form. Historians still debate whether this democratization of luxury items, like the pineapple, reflects a shift in how we perceive value in our society. Some suggest that the very idea of luxury has evolved, where once it was about rarity and exclusivity, today luxury may be defined by experiences or the abundance of small pleasures. Like enjoying a slice of pineapple on a warm afternoon, there's a certain joy in knowing that something so rich in history, once only available to the elite, can now be enjoyed by everyone. In that sense, the pineapple has come to symbolize a new kind of luxury, one that's less about possession and more about access and enjoyment. Of course, the way we interact with the pineapple today is vastly different from how it was experienced in its heyday. Gone are the elaborate hothouses and the gilded displays of wealth. The pineapple of today is less a symbol of prestige and more a symbol of the everyday joys of life. But in this shift, the pineapple has become more than just a fruit. It's become a cultural icon, whether it's adorning a summer cocktail, adding a touch of tropical flair to a fruit salad, or even appearing on everything from fashion to home decor. The pineapple's vibrant, spiky crown continues to evoke a sense of adventure and fun. It's also interesting to think about how the pineapple has been repurposed throughout history for various cultural and social purposes. In some regions, the fruit still holds ceremonial or symbolic significance, used in religious rituals or as a gesture of hospitality. In many ways, the pineapple's role in contemporary culture reflects its historical function as a symbol of warmth and welcome. Despite its widespread availability, the pineapple still manages to convey a certain warmth, a feeling of being welcomed into a place of comfort and indulgence. As you settle further into sleep, it's fascinating to think that, despite all the changes in the world around us, some things endure. The pineapple, with its tough exterior and sweet, refreshing interior, has outlasted the centuries. From the hothouses of Georgian England to the grocery aisles of today, the pineapple's journey mirrors humanity's own quest for transformation, our constant desire to take the rare, the impossible, and make it part of our everyday experience. Perhaps this is what makes the pineapple so enduring. It embodies both the simplicity and the complexity of life itself. It reminds us that, no matter how much time passes or how much the world changes, there are always small, sweet moments of joy to be found, even in the most unlikely of places. As we close the story of the pineapple's extraordinary journey, we are reminded of one final thing. The pineapple's allure isn't just about its historical significance or its role as a symbol of wealth. It's about what it represents, something that, no matter how much it's changed over the years, continues to bring people together, whether through a shared meal, a smile, or a fond memory. So as you drift off into the quiet of the night, perhaps with a soft, warm breeze drifting through your window, take a moment to appreciate the humble pineapple. The fruit that once dazzled the courts of England has traveled far, and, in a way, it's still with us, continuing to offer its sweetness, its bright colors, and its gentle reminder that joy, no matter how fleeting, is always within reach. Sweet dreams.